Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to give you a brief welcome before we get started. I'm Maya Elenevsky, the Events and Outreach Manager here at the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society. I'm excited to welcome you to our October Contemplative Practice webinar, Music for Healing and Balance, with Reginald Cyntje. For the last 10 years, we've offered webinars about contemplative practices in higher education and recently decided to expand webinars to speak to the broader relevance of practice to our lives beyond academia. These webinars intend to explore the relationship between contemplative practices and personal and social transformation, insight, and inspiration. We are so grateful to Reginald for offering this webinar today. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Reginald Cyntje. Reginald, born in Roseau, Dominica, and raised in St. Thomas, is a trombonist, educator, producer, and composer. He has created and performed an eclectic range of music. When you listen to Cyntje perform, you hear a passion for life and love in his sound. Growing up in the US Virgin Islands, he was steeped in the rich cultural music known as Quelbe, the official music of the US Virgin Islands. Quelbe was Reginald's introduction to improvised music. With cultural heritage at the forefront and social justice as the message, he has a deep-seated knowledge of Caribbean music and culture which has settled into his jazz trombone playing. To date, Cyntje has recorded 5 albums as a leader. Rise of the Protester, his most recent album from 2019, sonically captures humanity's need to thrive when faced with adversity. This is his boldest statement on social justice. Reginald Cyntje, the educator, is a director of jazz studies at Duke Ellington School of Arts, a professor of music at Montgomery College, Prince George's Community College, and a teaching artist with the Washington Performing Arts Society. Cyntje has also worked with jazz at Lincoln Center's Syncopated Leadership. He began teaching trombone studies at the age of 15 and has taught in classrooms and conducted workshops for over 20 years. We are so thrilled to be working with you, Reginald. And with that, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, thank you. Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. Like I said, I'm Reginald Cyntje. Welcome to my class. This is kind of the atmosphere I use to teach on a day-to-day basis in this virtual world. I want you to think about one thing before we get started. I want you to think about what's in mind when you think about music. Write down that word or that idea, put it in your mind as I go through this presentation. At the end of the presentation, we'll revisit that question. Maybe your idea of music might change, maybe not. Today, I will discuss and demonstrate how I use it in the classroom and on the stage for healing, balance, and activism. Here's a little background about me. I grew up in the Virgin Islands. I started playing music at the age of 12. 3 years later, I started teaching music. My private instructor was like, you into jazz? I have some students that are into jazz. I'm going to pass them on to you. Today, I'm living my dreams. On one hand, I'm a professional musician. On the other hand, I'm the director of jazz studies at Duke Ellington School of the Arts. We call it DESA for short. If you hear me say DESA, that's what I'm referring to, Duke Ellington School of the Arts. I'm also a part-time professor at Montgomery College. I love performing and I love teaching. Now, I think a very effective way to teach is by telling stories. My students love my stories. They're like, oh man, another story? Come on, Mr. Cyntje, why? So, do you like stories? Hopefully, you'll enjoy this story. This story captures my students' transition during the pandemic. So here it goes. The Duke Ellington School of the Arts Jazz Orchestra and Jazz Combo began doing a series of fundraising concerts back in December 2019. Remember 2019 when things were a little different? We were able to walk around without masks. It was a good time. It was a great time. Yes, back in the day, 2019. So raising money for this trip to Chicago. Now, at Duke Ellington School of the Arts, we practice educational justice. Basically, what that means is that we give the same high quality education to all students. We have students that are homeless. We have students who are poor. Students who are middle class, and of course, we have wealthy students. And so for those students that couldn't afford to pay for the trip, we are doing these fundraising concerts. Now, in addition to these fundraising concerts, we are also seasoned in the music because we had big plans. We had concerts for jazz at the school. We had concerts at the Kennedy Center coming up. We have the DC Jazz Festival. So the students were excited. It was, oh man, we're getting better. The band is growing. We're increasing our abilities to be able to play this called jazz. Now we did all these performances, and then on March 8th, notice at the time, that was our last performance. Now the students were at the top of their game at this performance, so they were excited. Their parents responded to them like, oh man, you all sound great. I remember the first time you performed, here's March, you sound fabulous. But it was something a little different in the air. You know, some students was, oh, we having a great start. Other students like, what's gonna happen next? I heard about this coronavirus. How is this gonna change things? And so one student predicted, he said, you know what, this is gonna probably be our last performance. The next day at school, things were different. We had students who were like, oh man, did you hear about the jazz orchestra last night? They were killing. They had a packed house, sold out room, and it was great. And the other students were like, but what about this coronavirus? What's going to happen? So within a week, a short period of time, it went from this space of excitement to like anxiety and frustration and worry. Seniors were like, what about prom? In 9th grade, we heard about prom. 10th grade, we heard about prom. 11th grade, now it's our turn to prom. We can't go to prom. What about graduation? What about our future? Other students concerned about what's going to happen with school. Are we going to have school? Will school be canceled? We go to school in the summer? What's going to happen? Then the official word came, school is closing. Now, again, I teach at Montgomery College, right? So that was the high school, Duke Ellington School of the Arts. My college students were also concerned. They were like, what's going on? They were dealing with similar issues. Some students never returned to school. Some students had to work extra hours to help their parents pay the bills because a lot of folks got laid off. Many students said, you know what, I'm going to just take time off of school. I'm paying for in-person learning, and why am I in this virtual classroom? So I'm not returning to school till after the pandemic. Now, there's another thing that happened. As I was helping students process what they were dealing with, what they were going through, to deal with another reality of the pandemic. Like I said, I'm a professional musician. No place to perform. So within a short period of time, me and colleagues experienced a serious financial fallout. Within a matter of days, I received calls and emails basically saying, all your gigs are canceled. Not postponed, not delayed until some other time, but canceled. So my gigs for 2020 and 2021 wiped off the books. Workshops, off the book. And basically what I do is I have different streams of income. So a huge portion of my income disappeared instantly. But I had to prepare. I had to prepare for teaching online. I had to prepare what platform I'm going to use. So I started doing some research. I heard about this strange platform known as Zoom. The only thing I knew about Zoom was actual record. I have a recorder that I use to record live performances. That's what I know about Zoom. I never heard of Zoom, the video conferencing software. I went online and saw research in Zoom, and I can't even tell you how many videos I watched on conferencing. It was like, oh, this is what you need to do for your audio settings. This is what you need to do to have the best video. This is what you need to do to look great on camera, right? I was like, really? I have to do all of this stuff to prepare for online? Well, how am I going to teach? How am I going to teach these students how to play with each other, interact with each other in this platform known as Zoom? And so I was like, I don't know how I'm going to connect with students in Zoom. It didn't seem natural. So the next step was talk to private students. I have students that I teach at institution. I have students that I teach privately. And I was trying to figure out what's going to happen with private students. So I reached out to the private students, and many of them said, I don't know about this online platform. So I lost half my private students. They were like, I don't study trombone lessons or jazz studies lessons. How are we going to interact with each other? That's okay. I'll wait until after the pandemic. No more private students for the most part. I had a few that was left over during the pandemic. So the next step was basically preparing to teach online. And so there was some confusion because everyone was just thrust into this online world. So it was like, we're going to start school. How are we going to grade the students? Will we just get pass and fail? What's going to happen? And so finally, DCPS said, okay, we're going to move break from April to March, which allowed teachers some time to plan, and then we're going to move into the online platform. And so as I was preparing in my lesson plan and getting my setup and decided I was going to teach at home, then I had these questions coming to me. How will I teach? How will the students react? How will I teach online? Will be present, right? Because that's like a critical thing as a teacher. Will the students be present? Even if they're physically there, will they be present in class? How will I rehearse on sound? So as we all know with Zoom and video conferencing, there's some type of delay. There's some type of lag. Well, when you rehearse ensemble, it's like if you count off 1, 2, 3, 4, everyone is going to be hearing that differently. So it became almost impossible to rehearse an ensemble. So I sat down and think about ways about, okay, maybe I can do is have the saxophones in one breakout room, and then the trombones in one breakout room, and then the trumpets, and then have them play one at a time. Thinking about all of these ways in which I can teach online, right? How will I teach my college students? You know, they said, many of them said, I'm working full-time job, so I can't come to the synchronous class. I need to do asynchronous lessons. So I had to prepare a separate lesson for some of my students that could make it to the physical classroom or the Zoom session. But one thing kept ringing in my mind. It was an advice I received when I first started teaching. It said, be resourceful. So I decided to be creative and flexible during the pandemic. The next thing that helped me to prepare for the pandemic or prepare for teaching online is the idea of watching my children. And so every day they will talk about teachers not being present, or how online classes sucked, or not being able to see their friends, or not really be able to socialize. So I listen to them because I have boys who are teenagers and my daughter is in elementary school. So I listen to them talk about their experiences, and I took those experiences at heart and used those experiences to prepare me for teaching in a virtual platform. So the first day came, and to no surprise, the students were not motivated. The first day of online class, some of my best students checked completely out. And so from the basic things, I want to say basic, normal things, frustration with the pandemic, frustration with not being able to see their friends, frustration with the fact that they had to go online immediately and find somewhere to adjust to this online platform. So they were upset all the things that were going on. And I decided that, the best thing to do right now is listen. There are more serious situations. You had students who had to deal with a sick family member or someone who passed away, right? And so in that moment, you have to think of how are you going to connect with these students and be compassionate. You empathize with them. Then they also complained about their teachers checking out, their teachers not being present. So I had to think of my colleagues. My colleagues were dealing with similar things. It's like, how am I going to teach a class when most of the students are not showing up? The other thing to deal with, and what a lot of folks didn't realize, is that many students didn't have access to resources. You had, say, a household where the parents had to use the device for work. That same device needed to be used by all the kids in the household. So trying to share one device with poor Wi-Fi, with the cell service. So like they might not even have Wi-Fi. They have to use Sprint or T-Mobile or Verizon, and that wasn't good enough. And so now they're trying to show up online class. Or some students not wanting to show their background. Their issues at home, or they maybe might be in a shelter and not wanting to their background when they show up for class. So all these things were playing a role, and the teachers were dealing with other things, right? They had things that they were concerned about. They had frustrations, of course. They had family members who were sick, or in some situations, teachers who themselves got the virus. So it was a very difficult situation. And of course, we could say we're all in this together, and how, let's empathize with each other. But I needed to give the students an important tool that I learned when I was a kid. And that tool basically was music is a tool for healing, right? Music is a tool that we can use to process information. Music is a tool that helps us through difficult times. And I said to the students, you have this gift. You're learning how to play music. Use your gift of playing music. Use your gift of understanding how to improvise and express your thoughts, not ignore the thoughts. Think about what you feel about the pandemic and use music to process that information. And so they had questions about, what about this, what about that? And I said, you know what? I'll tell you how I use it when I was a kid, when I was your age. And so I went back and I talked about when I first entered high school. Back in 1989, the Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, was enjoying growth because it was about maybe 30 or 40 years without any hurricanes. So you could build and your building will stay there because nothing's going to get down. You could enjoy the, every year you could add something to it, right? And so, we had our homes, we had businesses, and the island was beautiful, and we just had to worry with my homes. But in 1989, we received warning a hurricane is coming. And most folks were like, oh, that's what you all say every year. It was just a warning, it's a watch. We're not taking it seriously. But on the day of, we took it seriously. And so I was about 4 weeks into high school, getting used to high school student, meeting new friends, playing music. I was excited to be able to play with a high school band. I was like, yes, I'm in high school now. I'm no longer in middle school. I'm no longer in elementary school. I'm a ninth grader. I'm almost grown, right? And so 4 weeks in, here comes a hurricane. And it happened at night. When my mom was trying to leave work from home, she got stuck at work because the roads were too bad. So that evening, I went to sleep in my room. My sisters went to sleep in their room, my father in his room. And then shortly after that, within maybe an hour, we started hearing the roof banging, right? It was almost like someone's on top of the house, like hitting the house sledgehammer, right? And so what was happening is that you had the roof being lifted up and down, part of the roof, because of the hurricane. And it was like, okay, what do we do now? So my father gathered all of us and we went into my childhood closet. I had the small room in the house. So myself, my three sisters, and my father in a tiny little closet at home on top of a blanket. And so my sisters fell asleep. I don't know how they fell asleep, but they fell asleep during a hurricane. And I looked up and I saw my father was terrified, right? And I will never forget that image. So this morning we went outside and there's destruction everywhere. They lost their homes, possessions, etc. And as I was processing everything, I can remember having music. I had music in two ways. So one way was being able to play my instrument. And so what I would do is my instrument and play. The first exercise that you learn as a wind instrument is to play long tones. So I'm demonstrating a long tone right now. And for those of you listening, maybe take a deep breath, exhale, clear your mind, because that's the process. When you play a long tone, you can't think about what you had for lunch. You just think about that sound. You have to meditate on that sound, right? So I'm going to take a deep breath right now. I'm going to play a long tone on my instrument. And the first example of me process hurricane. So I'll pick up my horn. I'm a little ninth grader at school. And so, well, not at school because of the hurricane. Take a deep breath. And so I'll take a deep breath and hold the note for about 16 counts. And that was my form of meditation, practicing, right? And then I'll work on scales and I play the scales. And so playing these exercises, I was able to just focus on a particular goal. That helped me to process what was going on with the hurricane. Because at the same time, I knew that I had career goals. I knew that I wanted to be a professional musician. I'm practicing, I'm studying, and I'm saying, okay, how do I feel about this hurricane? And at the time, I was also learning about improvisation, the whole concept of being able to spontaneously compose, right? And the spontaneous composition is like, it's like you having a conversation you didn't expect having. And so instantly I could pick up the horn and say, how do I feel about this hurricane? Right? And I could express my emotions using music. And so I told the students, I said, look, this is an opportunity for you to use your skills to express your emotions about how you feel about this pandemic. Use improvisation. It worked for me as a child, and it will work for you now during the pandemic. And so now we're flowing. We're like, okay, I got you, Mr. Cyntje. I understand. I practice. Yes, I'm gonna work on this music, and now I have extra time because before the pandemic, the students would run ensemble to ensemble to ensemble, and they would find little pockets of time to practice in school. Now they have hours at home, so they'll have to go to class one time, but it's all this free time they have now, and they can use that time to practice. And practicing is a great thing. And one of the, let's talk about with practicing. Practicing is like if someone gave you a block of wood to say, here you go, Mr. Such and Such, use this block of wood to carve your masterpiece. And as you practice, you remove the unwanted pieces from this block of wood. And eventually, over time, your masterpiece is revealed to you. That's all that practicing is that you're working every day to eventually discover your true self within music. And so the students were like, oh yeah, I dig this stuff. I'm gonna practice because I want to be, they knew that they wanted to. I had seniors that had already been, accepted to college. They had scholarships, and they knew that they wanted to be on point when they were freshmen in college. And so they were practice studying. And so we're working it out. The idea that music is everywhere, that practicing is important to help you process emotions. And so I'll talk about the heartbeat being a form of music. I'll talk about you could hear music in traffic, you could hear music in nature. They're following me, right? And then the main concept is that you can express emotions through music. So we made it through understanding music is healing. The students on point, they are moving forward. They are growing. I'm like, man, you all are doing better than in-person classes. What do we do now? We just continue moving. Oh, this pandemic is no problem. This Zoom thing is no problem. Then, of course, life. What happened? Racial injustice. So here we go with people not learning from history and history becoming unreal, and we're not learning the lessons. And so now history repeats itself, right? So the students show up to class upset, like Mrs. Cyntje, how do you feel about this? Well, how do you feel? How are you processing this information? One of the things I want you to think about would help you to put yourself in the space of these students. Many of the students at the school are students of color, mostly African Americans at Duke and School of the Arts. But there's a diverse population. So I want you to think about these students, and I want you to ask yourself this question. How do you feel about social justice in the United States? Do you think that we have justice for all, or just justice for some? Right? Imagine all the folks who fight for this country, all the folks who invest time, taxes, etc. We are supposed to be all guaranteed the same rights in this country. If we're all, I served in the military. Do I have the same rights since I served in the military as anyone else in this country? Right? Students at their age recognizing this, like you in high school, you should just join your years in high school. Why are you thinking about social justice issues? Students, back to the students, back to the story. The students are angry, dealing with a pandemic and injustice. Like, how many more things can we compound under this very difficult situation? They asked me about, activism. What do I think? How can they do this or that? And I said, look, first, do some unbiased research. A lot of times when we research and we try to read about stuff, it comes through balanced lens, depending on our news sources, etc. So unbiased research requires you to just go and learn the truth. So learn the truth about movement, all movements that existed, whether you're talking about the labor movement or the civil rights movement in the United States, any type of movement, they have this pattern. It's like, first you have the folks who started. A lot of times the folks who create the movements are women, right? So the women are the organizers. And then after that, you have the folks who come and give speeches and give these very passionate speeches. And then after that, you have the children who take to the street, and it just like draws everyone's attention once the children take to the street, right? So research movements, what happens, and see how people use music in movements all throughout time, right? We have, during the folk movement, you have folks like Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger, Peter Paul Mary. You have Joan Baez, Woody Guthrie. You have, during the civil rights movement, you have folks like Nina Simone and many others. You have all these folks who take part in dealing with using music for movements. And so I told them, another way, just like you process healing with music, you can use music for social justice. Fela Kuti used music for social justice, right? So you have all these examples. So how are you going to use music for social justice? And so some students were like, I want to march. And I was like, well, that's one way of activism, but there are many forms of activism, right? So some students couldn't march because they have autoimmune conditions, and their parents were like, I know you want to march, but that's not happening. COVID. You and marching, COVID don't go together. So the students were like, Mr. Cyntje, my mom said I can't march. What can I do? well, listen to your mom, don't march, but you can do this, right? So they got into me, they asked me questions about how did I get into activism, because they're familiar with some things, but not too much. I said, look, one of the ways I got into activism is that as a kid, there were all these Quelbe songs, right? There was this the music was originally called Bambula music. Eventually, USVI decided to settle on the term Quelbe. And so, growing up in the Caribbean, growing up in the Virgin Islands, this beautiful place, there was, of course, injustice happening there as well. So in 1848, this his nickname was General Bodo. He showed up the the governor of the Danish West Indies because it was Danish territory before it became U.S. territory. And he said to the governor, look, we are about to do or have a slave rebellion if you don't sign this Emancipation Proclamation. And the governor saw the situation and signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and it was a peaceful transition, right? But many of the former plantation owners were like, we're not happy with this, we're in free labor. And so they mistreated the former enslaved Africans. And so in 1878, the woman by the name of Queen Mary, that was her nickname, her name was actually Mary Thomas, and other women led a labor movement on the island of St. Croix. They said, we promised you that if you don't get it together, we are going to burn down these businesses. And so because of the broken promise from 1848, 1878, Queen Mary led a labor movement. And so that was an example of my whole understanding of movements. Because here you have it as a woman by the name of Queen Mary, rallying all these people together to say, we need to stand up for social justice. And so that moment was captured in a song. And the favorite song is known as Queen Mary, right? And so at this moment, I want to play a song. But before I play, I want you to realize that this song taught me about cultural pride, the power of women, and activism. And also with Quelbe music, I learned my introduction to storytelling, because in folk songs we have these great stories, and also improvisation. So here is Queen Mary. This is a similar version to what I heard as a child. This is actual tradition.
Queen Mary, where you going, come on? Queen Mary, where you going, come on? Don't ask me nothing, child. Give me my channel. Bars and jailhouses where the money is. Don't ask me nothing, child. Just give me my channel. Bars and jailhouses where the money is.
And so as you can hear, you have this grooving music. So we're kids, we're running around the school and singing with our friends, Queen, and singing the song. And so that's the song I heard. And it had affected me, not only first grabbing me up rhythm, because that's kind of what music does. Music says, here's some honey. And it grabs you up, and then afterwards it says, here's the message. And so you're singing a message, oh, Queen Mary, and then you get older. Oh, Queen Mary, and then you're like, oh, Queen Mary. Oh, this one was real powerful. And so a kid, that song stuck with me. And so when I became an adult, I was like, when I record my first album, I want to record Queen Mary. I want to do a version of it. And so when I did this version of Queen Mary later on my first album, one of the things I thought about was the role of each instrument. And so the trombone represents the conch shell. So the conch shell is used in many cultures as a call to action. When you hear someone play the conch shell, it's like a call to action. In fact, growing up, we would see pictures of General Bodo holding a conch shell because he's calling all people to action. And then we have the marimba on the album because it's so close to the African instrument, the balafon. The marimba comes from the balafon. And then we have the silpan, the Caribbean's version of West African drumming. So like first when the steamer first started being used, they would just use it as a rhythmic instrument. Eventually, they will start morphing it to the point where it became a Caribbean instrument, right? So you have all these different elements, and of course you have the percussion and then the bass. So you have all these different instruments to represent Queen Mary. So think about what you think of, think about Queen Mary. Think about what took place in 1878. Think about what you know about social justice, folk songs, etc. when you hear this version of Queen Mary. So I arranged. That was the vibe, Queen Mary, And we when we recorded the tune, the wide range, there was, I grew up playing Quelbe music, calypso music, reggae music, and I studied how to play jazz, and I'm a jazz musician. So this is a perfect marriage of my Quelbe heritage or my culture heritage and my jazz training experience coming together. And so I use that example for the students as well. And then one of the things I talked about is the question of folk music and folk music in multiple cultures. So like for example, here in the United States, we have folk music with the folks like Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger. And then what happened with some of the folks here in the United States, the government went after those folk artists. They had to go underground because they were talking so much truth, right? The government was like, you all are all communists. And the folks was like, okay, we're going into hiding. And so the college students at the time were like, okay, we can still find this very powerful music to use to talk about some of the injustices happening in the world, and turned to Caribbean folk music, and because of that, that led to the popularity of Harry Belafonte. And so his popular Deo deals with social justice issues. Most people oh, Deo, that's a fun song. When you listen to the lyrics, you realize that it's dealing with social justice issues. And so again, telling the students about the connection between social justice and music and my own experience. And then we continued talking, and I told them, I said, every album I've recorded deals with social justice issues. My first album, Freedom, Sharing, and Celebration, is social justice and cultural heritage. My second album, Self-Love, Self-Respect, Determination, right? Those are part of social justice. Elements of Life was my third album, and on that album, it talks about balancing the elements inside of us, like not only inside of us, but around us. When you have an element that you have too much of one element, then there's too much water, there's a flood, too much fire, things are burning, right? And so you want to make sure that you are balanced within as well as our planet. Like if we don't take care of our planet, the elements are out of whack, and then we suffer. The planet is going to be like, all right, let's deal with these human beings, but I'm going to still move forward. And so the idea of having these elements in balance, that's an important thing. And then my fourth album, Spiritual Awakening, deals with a path to spiritual awakening. First, become aware of there's a problem, and then going through different steps until you get to the point where you can rejoice. My latest album, Rise of the Protest, deals with different forms of activism and protesting. And there are many ways that you can protest. You have Ava DuVernay with DuVernay's direction, using her lens to tell a positive story of African Americans. You have Ta-Nehisi Coates using his pen. You have folks like Malcolm X, Ida B. So many folks throughout time that have been part of this social justice initiative, right? But one of the things I like to talk about with this album is the song "No Justice, No Peace." So on the album, there's a song that I've played many places, and when we performed the two before the pandemic, folks would connect with this song because they can feel the passion, they can feel the energy of what it feels like to work really hard for a space and then still not have justice with that space, right? So this song talks about, but it kind of tries to use music to express that feeling of no justice, no peace. So I want you to listen to this piece of music and then see if you can think or see if you can feel about the idea of no justice, no peace. Or maybe you might want to explore your concepts of justice and peace as you listen. And then I'm going to play a little snippet at the end of the song, because at the end of the song, I try to capture the rhythm of no justice, no peace, no justice, no peace, as if folks were chanting at a march. So here's no justice, no peace. Again, the idea of you can't have peace with justice. So that's the melody into the solo section, and then I played the ending. So that's no justice, no peace. And every time there was in 2017, we probably did like a whole bunch of concerts around live clips with we were playing the music of the rise of the protester music. And every time tears would come in that when we played No Justice, No Peace. Because folks they knew what we were dealing with. And the students know. And so they're processing this stuff. And the idea of that, we all, the way I like to look at activism is that, back in 2010, we had this initiative known as a VI for Change. And basically the concept behind that was that we all are going to use our talent to create positive change within the community. If you're a mathematician, then you use that gift. If you are a English major, you use that gift. If you are a musician or a visualist, you use your gift and use that as a way to mentor each one, create positive change. And it was a very powerful tool to be used at that time. It's the idea of that we all have skills, and we can use those skills to create change. It's like if you think like a lake, this lake of corruption, right? Like maybe government right now, I don't know. But let's say you have this lake of corruption, and everyone take a pebble, right? We all grab a pebble, and we put our pebble in that lake. That's 100 people or 200 people or 5,000 people. Idea with all of those pebbles, we can eventually remove most of the corruption. Maybe not all of it, but most of it. And that's activism, is that we're finding our space within this country, within this world, to create some type of positive change. And that's why I get students to see, is that they can create positive change just by doing one or two things. But being that I'm a human being and I'm responsible for teaching, I'm responsible for making sure my band is straight. I'm, dealing with the energy level of kids when dealing with stuff. Even my kids will be like, oh, I had to go to school. I don't like this online stuff. Or they just want to be in a space where I am refreshing when they leave the space of being in the online world. How do you stay motivated? How do you stay present in a time like this when you're dealing with a pandemic? And I had to find a way in this time of how I'm going to rejuvenate, how I am going to process this stuff and deal with it head on, so I can be fresh, ready for every time I show up to teach or to parent or to interact with loved ones. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, I decided I'm going to focus on something else. As I'm telling the students to focus on stuff, I'm practicing what I'm preaching. And so last year, I composed all of these songs around the concept of healing, right? And so I focused in each one of those songs. And during the pandemic, I spent all my time practicing and working on really learning the music, learning the chords, learning the melodies, being able to explore those songs without any hindrance. And so as I was thinking about playing this music, I was thinking about what is the connection between healing and communication, right? Because we need communication to heal. We got to communicate that there's something wrong or something that needs healing. The connection between healing and forgiveness. What's the connection between healing and yearning, right? Healing and magnetism, healing and motivation, healing and passion, healing and appreciation. I had a friend that passed away some years ago, and we were in a band together. He was a band leader, and he would end every conversation with "I appreciate." I remember one time in particular, it was after rehearsal, and there was a discussion about some topic. I don't even remember what the topic was. And he told the guy that he disagreed with. He said, man, I don't agree with you, but I appreciate you, right? And then, of course, an acceptance. Acceptance is challenging and part of the healing process. And so I focused on all these concepts. And from the beginning of the pandemic until September 18, I practiced and studied this music. And then I went into the studio to record my 6th album. And on that album, I'm focusing on the healing process, right? I'm thinking all of these conditions that we're dealing with have been placed in hyper focus. Healing on loss, healing on trauma, healing pain, healing and relationships, right? And so that was my focus for this. And now I would like to demonstrate for you how I went about composing one of the songs. The title track in the album is titled Healing. And so one of the things I think about healing is that you go through this process. Like you went into the woods and you got a cut, and then went to the healing process. There was a scab, and then after that you were left with a scar. Sometimes with the case of loss, we don't stop healing, but it's still a process, day-to-day process. So when I'm dealing with composing, I try to think of the meaning of the chords, and chords really deal with emotion. So here are the first chords in healing. It first starts with these major chords going back and forth. Then a release. Then there's a tension build. Then slight release, tension, and then the final release. And the thing about this song, as it goes through the healing process, is that the beginning of the song is similar to the ending. The beginning is like this. And then after you go through the healing process, is that there's still something to remind you of the process. And so the chords change, but they're still kind of related. And so the melody does a similar thing. It's that when the melody, it kind of expands and has this tension. So when I'm playing the melody, And so now I'm going to demonstrate or play for you the finished product, putting all of those pieces together. And so as you listen, think of the healing process. But I recognize that, when you write music without words, you could give the listener a word and the finished composition, but then folks come up with their own meaning behind the music. So see what you hear as you listen. Do you hear the healing process, or do you hear something else? So here's it. So that's healing. And one of the things I think about when I perform is this idea of the circle of energy. And I tell the students about this all the time, is that when you perform, you're not just creating the music by yourself. It's actually a community thing. You are part of an energy in a room that everyone is connecting in the room. And if you show up to a performance with that idea, then you'll be able to connect with people deeper than just the notes. And one of the ways I learned this lesson was perform master musicians. And so the master musician will get on stage or walk into the room before getting on the stage and really pitch to all the spirits in the room. Somebody in the room that had a difficult day at work, someone else, celebrating something. And so there are all of these emotions, there's all of these thoughts and feelings when it comes to a performance. And the master musician gets on stage, the band, and plays music in a way where it connects with each spirit in the room. And you could feel the energy rising. You could feel people like rising and falling together and going through things, regardless of what they've been experiencing that day. And that's kind of the magic of music. You have to connect. And one of the ways to connect is by paying attention. And so if you want to, one of the things I like to do is visual. So imagine you on stage, right? Or you're at a performance and you see this bright purple light leave the bandstand. And so now it's traveling through the audience. And remember, in the audience adds something to the light. And the color starts to change as it goes through each audience member. And the light passes through the room, then it returns to the bandstand. And that informs the band how to perform. And that circle of energy is powerful because the artists now recognize, whether they know it or not, that they are part of the music, right? And you can do it with improvisation because not only do you have the melodies that you created with the compositional process. So the composition is like if you're writing a paper, right? You're writing down your thoughts and use an eraser. But the spontaneous composition is where you take those same techniques that goes into composing a tune, but you do it on the spot. As I'm at a club and I'm like, oh, somebody is angry, so maybe I go, right? Then somebody might be happy, I might go, I'm playing a way where I'm connecting with all the listeners in the room. And so the same thing happens in the classroom. So the same circular energy that exists in a performance exists in a classroom. When you walk into a classroom, you might have a lesson plan like this week, the students are going to learn A, B, and C. But you get to the classroom, somebody's having a bad day. Somebody's upset. Somebody is sad. Somebody's ecstatic. And you have all of these emotions in the room. And so you have to figure out a way of how you're going to tailor the lesson to fit that particular day in the classroom. And so once you're always connecting students, then they're going to feel that you're present and they will be present because they'll see that you see them. Not that you're just looking at them as like, okay, I have this plan and regardless of what's going on, this is the plan. But because you see them, they open up to you and they open up to the information that you're presenting. And so the same circular energy that happens in the stage, circular energy happens in the classroom. And so you have activism, if that's the lesson, or healing, if that's the lesson, or balance of the lesson happens in the classroom and on the bandstand. So if I'm on stage and I want to talk about social justice issues, I have to open up the audience to be able to receive that. And I have to pay attention to the energy that they're sending me. If I'm in the classroom and I want to talk about social justice issues, I have to see where the class is at and make sure that they open up to the energy. And because I teach history well on the college level, I can show I could use historical examples to also talk about these lessons, whether on the bandstand or in the classroom. And then what we have is that learning is teaching and teaching is learning. You have a circle. Like I can't just show up to the classroom and say, I'm the teacher, what is correct. No, let's have a discussion and let's come to the truth together, right? And again, this idea of the connection of the circle of energy is one of the powerful tools that once students learn this, they can use this effectively in their careers. And they're like, Mr. Cyntje, why you always gotta be deep? No, man, it's not about being deep. It's just about teaching you how to be a musician, how to use music in a way where you can connect with people effectively. And of course, connect with your emotions. So one of the I teach the students is about the meaning of notes. Right? And so I'm gonna play a C major chord. You just have to take for it if you don't play music. So here's the C major chord, right? And now I'm gonna C major scale. Right? Because we're in this part of the hemisphere, we have a certain view of music. But let's say we were in India, we're in the Caribbean, I'll probably use a different scale because in different cultures, there's certain cultural norms and it changes, right? And so understand as a musician is also important when you communicate certain things, right? But in this culture, the scale works. And so right away, I tell the student, think about the first note, C. What does that sound like? They're like, well, it sounds stable. Yeah, it sounds like home. So let's say C is home. And so we apply the emotion of C is like home. So if we play a 1 against a major 7 chord, then it feels like home. If you go to the 9th or the 2nd, that feels like, like I'm relaxing somewhere. So if I'm playing, if I want to create a peaceful emotion in someone listening, maybe play the 9th. It's like, I disarmed them. They're not upset anymore. It's like music just took me over and I feel calm. 3 kind of tells you about the type of house. For example, this might be that type of house, or right? So you have the 4 that tells you in major, the 3 that tells you a certain type of house. And then the 4 is like restless. So you got, some people talk about the 4 as an avoid note in major, but the way I like to look at it is like a note that helps you create tension and release. Has a certain feeling to it. Some people raise the 4. You don't necessarily need to raise the 4. The 5 is kind of like 1. It's like home. It's not no tension. I'm at home. Then the 6, your favorite aunt. It's like that aunt that talks mess all the time. It's like you want to go with that on every day. Like a lot of jazz riffs, you 6, right? So the 6 is like your favorite. I was like, Auntie, come on, tell me all about that. And then the 7 is like sometimes when you want to deal something, like if you writing a song about a flower, sometimes there might be like a set in there, right? So 7 could sometimes have tension, or sometimes be pretty, and then you're back to 1, right? So it's like, oh man, music is kind of magical, and these composers know what they're doing when composing songs to make us feel certain ways, right? And teaching students how to do this like, oh, what? I can inspire somebody using certain notes. Like this is great, and so they use it for themselves and use it for listeners. A beautiful thing happened. So we got to the end of the school year during the pandemic, right? And the students, I knew that they didn't have anything going on. I knew that all the events canceled, and they were like, "What are we gonna do?" And it was like, I wish we could continue doing this in some way because this is nice. I like this Zoom thing. This is kind of like this us meeting on a. They got used to it. Sometimes we get on Zoom and class ended like at 5:20. We'll be on Zoom until 7 o'clock. It's like y'all don't have nothing to do. They'd be like, "Nah, Mr. Cyntje, come on, tell us some more." Right? So we'd be on Zoom all day. And so when the summer began, I said when the school year ended, I said, well, how many of you want to continue meeting twice a week? And all my jazz studies students said yes. And so we met twice a week, every until the current school year. So I had them all summer long. So at summer we talked about music concepts, we talked about activist stuff, we talked about, you know, them going to college or having meetings with the outgoing seniors and the incoming seniors and how best to lead a combo or be a section leader. And it was great. It was a time to meet. And one of the important lessons, and I said this earlier, was just ability to just sit there and listen. Because sometimes we'll class and they were like, Mr. Cyntje, I don't feel like playing today. And I'll be like, why? And they'll be like da 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 da. And after the da 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 of expressing and getting what was whatever they were feeling, they were like they saw I was playing. Okay, I'm gonna get my instrument. I'm gonna play now, right? And so just the I listening opened them up to always wanting to learn. And that was like if I could take anything else from the pandemic, it was just that I just being able to listen continuously. And so I'm left with this. My entire career have taught me this. From the time I first started playing music to going through the hurricane and going through different hurricanes because that was the first one of 3 that I went through, to dealing with ups and downs in life. Music's always been this tool for me to be able to express my emotions. Like people walk up to me and be like, "Oh man, you must be pissed off about something," because I always have this tool to help me to process whatever is going on. And so left with that, music is a contemplative practice, right? Every day I bear witness how music continues to create balance, heal, and inspire positive change, not only in my life, but in the lives of my students and listeners, supporters. And so, back to the real question. What comes to mind when you think about music? That's my presentation.
Thank you so much, Reginald. I see some folks clapping. I hope you can see them too. So at this point, we would like to open up the floor for some questions. And so you can use the raised hand button, which I believe is down on your control panel at the bottom of your screen. Then I can unmute you and you can talk directly to Reginald. Or if you'd like, you can also submit a chat and I'll read it out loud. Some questions did come in already, but I just wanted to give a few moments to let folks formulate their thoughts and share those with you. I know I could also, Reginald, go for another musical tune while people are collecting their thoughts. If you have a little something you want to share or not,
Sure,
just
sure.
throwing it
I
out
don't
there.
mind playing. That's not a problem. All right, I'll play. Since the blues is a great unifier, I'll play improvised chorus of the blues.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
let's see. So I'm going to read some of the questions that have come in the chat. Okay, so the first one is a question that was prompted by how you broke down the interpretation of notes in the chords. How
Hmm.
did you learn this musical symbolic language, and what kind of practice supported your learning?
Sure. So the way I learned about music and emotion was first listening to music, and the idea of just on asking this very important question: why? Why does this sound good? What is it about? Why does this particular piece of music make me feel this way? And so once I started investigating, I saw that many musicians use similar things, right? And so if someone is expressing certain things, they might bend a note if they're expressing sorrow, or if they're expressing joy, they might use certain notes. And so when I listen to records and I go through the act of transcribing, which meant like listen to a recording, being able to sing along and learning that information off the recording, it taught me these lessons, and also working with master musicians. I really believe in able to apprentice. And so I spent like my from since I first started playing music, I had mentors that taught me, not necessarily tell me like say you should do this, but I would go on stage and then I would listen to the play, and that was the lesson. So that's how I, started learning about the connection between music and emotion, and then saw that against certain chords, and then investigation, like sitting at the piano, by investigating I could start learning about how certain notes sound like certain chords. So it was a process over a period of years.
Great, thank you. Another question that came in via chat. Does it matter that other listeners to your music may interpret it completely different from your intention?
Doesn't matter at all, and that's the beautiful thing. It's like poetry, right? And I'm on the Love album. I wrote a lot of poems, and so the Love album was my way of saying, here's what I'm thinking. And so on that album, I have my poetry and my music combined on that particular album. And so that was the only album in which I said specifically, this is what I'm thinking in the music. I like poetry. I like the idea of that when we read poems, not when we watch poems perform by say a spoken word, but when we read a poem, those words ripple in our imagination differently than someone else in the same poem, right? And so for me, that's like music. It's like I can compose a piece of music, but I was fascinated when listeners tell me, when I was listening to this is what I thought about. It reminded me of this and the other. And so there are many interpretations of one composition. I can say this is what I was thinking when composing music, but because there are no words, listeners are welcome, and it's actually what happens. They come up with me. It's like, I know that this song means this, but let me tell you what I thought about while I was listening to this piece of music. And that's beautiful because then I get all these interpretations of the composition. And then the composition, then they can find themselves in the music, and then they can create memories with the music. That's the next thing about music, is that it kind of locks in emotions and memories of things that when you that song again, like all those things that happen when you first listen to the song back. You know, music is a beautiful thing. Yeah. So yeah, it doesn't matter. I love it.
Awesome. Um, would you consider your daily music practice a kind of meditation?
Yes. In fact, for those folks who watch me perform, I close my eyes and I rock back and forth in stage when I'm playing, right? Because I need to go in a space where I'm open to the energy, right? So like I'm one of the folks that's very I'm you know, some people talk about being connected and open to different energies and spirits, etc. So I'm one of those folks, but I don't like to keep on. I don't like to walk around and just feel energy from different people on a regular basis. So I kind of shut off when I'm walking around day to day, and when I go on stage, I become real sensitive to all of the energy and music around me. And so it is a meditation. So like when I'm like really in the zone and I'm practicing, I'm meditating, I'm praying, I'm expressing myself, I'm exercising, you know, all at the same time when I'm music. And so the same thing when I go on stage, because I realize that when I go to that very authentic place in music, then folks listening can feel that. You know, I'm not playing music to say, hey man, here's this hit that I just created for you to go and up and like bubblegum music is like bubble music. When I teach about my history course, is that it disappears really fast, right? And so it's about going to authentic places that the music lasts long. And so I'm meditating when I'm practicing, I'm meditating when I'm performing.
Thank you. Let's see. Another question in the chat, unless anyone is raising their hand, which I don't see. Can you say more about how you consider the audience for your music when you are composing or working alone? How does a sense of audience influence your solo creative process?
In the sense of audience, it influenced me on stage, but when I'm composing, the process is entirely different. It's almost like I'm walking down the street and someone hits me and say, here's this message, right? So when I compose, what happens is that I sometimes get sick because there's this message that hits me that becomes like this compelling that I need to get out. I don't actually go into composing like just sitting and write this song about this message. Now what happens? What happens usually is like with Right Protester album music, that came to me because of all the stuff that was going on. With the Healing album, those songs came to me all around the same time. And so usually the music on the album, they all were composed at the same time. So it's almost this continuation. It's not like these random I pick from different places. It's kind of like this message comes to me and I have to get it out. And I'm like, why? Why now? Like for example, he came out to me and I was in the middle of promoting the Rise of Prota album and doing these concerts. All of a sudden, these song composers, I was like, I'm in the middle of performing the Rise of Protester music. That's my space. And the universe was like, no, that's not space. This is the space. These are the compositions you need to write. You need to sit down and write composition. I was like, okay, here we go. And that's what happened with the Healing album. And then when I perform, it's considering the audience, but I'm saying to them, here's this message that came to me, and let me know what you think about it. And so what they do, I go perform, and the audience responds. This was beautiful. I like this, or whatever their response is. Music. And so I have these course orders that come out to all my performances that support these compositions that I write whenever the spirit hits me. So kind of the process. It's a little different. I perform with someone else's band. When I perform with someone else's band, I play whatever the music is asking me to play. So playing with a top 40 band, or if I'm playing with a funk group, I play with the music and it's asking me to play, or the audio, etc. But when I'm playing the music that I compose, it's almost like me saying, all right, folks, here's something that came to me. Let me know what you think. I'm very vulnerable in that moment and saying, this is my authentic thoughts on a particular topic, and so I'm expressing them, and so then we share that moment together.
Beautiful. Um, this individual is asking where your music can be found. They live in St. Croix and share the history of Queen Mary, etc. Their family was also musicians, and they're just expressing gratitude.
Okay, so my music is on all platforms. Um, it's on the streaming platforms, all the platforms that you still play music, and of course my website. So anywhere that you listen to music, you can find my music there.
Maybe we'll also share your web page in the chat so that everyone can click there and find you. So I'm just going to do that right now. All right. I'm just going to see if anyone else is raising their hand. Seems like people are being a little shy and just chatting, which is fine. Here's a fun question. Do you have any suggestions for our playlists? So we're curious if you have heard any recent music that's really impacted you or wowed you.
Oh, let's see. One of the things that play in my mind, even I'm not trying this, is John Coltrane's Alabama. That's kind of spirit is at. John Coltrane's Alabama, or Nina Simone singing her version of Strange Fruit, or yeah, there's so many pieces. I can send you a whole list of stuff, but that's kind of like, you know, it's just like for me and many others, it's like, you know, being a student of history, it's like we're going to learn the lesson so we don't have to repeat history over and over and over again. That's kind of where my spirit is at. It's like I go into that room and I'm teaching history, and I'm teaching just history, the history of American popular music, talking about different movements. And I'm like, wow, we're repeating the same thing. We're seeing the same personalities again, the same situations, and so that's kind of like music is playing in my head right now, you know. And so I you know, that's why it's so good to play the from the Healing album, because it's my way of processing all of the stuff that's going on, you know. Because I have young kids and I have to think about their future. You know, my sons, you know, walking down the street, I have to think of them not being afraid. Because I grew up in the Caribbean. I grew up in a place where I went out in the night. There was a club actually when I was a kid that was for kids that was 17 and younger, right? And so this club for kids for 17 and younger, that's where I learned how to do my hip hop dancing. I go to the club as a kid and do my hip hop moves, right? I could be like, yeah, break dancing, or Africa, my kid, and play my EPMD. But now my boys can just like simply just enjoy themselves without me having to have this conversation with them. And my father didn't have to have a conversation with me because I grew up in the Caribbean. And so those types of songs are in my head. And so I'm trying to find balance between those types of songs and those the songs where you just like, oh, you know, and fire, where you just chill into the music, or make some, you know, maybe some, you know, James Brown, you know. But songs like Alabama by John Coltrane, like in my head constantly, you know. And so it's finding that balance.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of children, looks like we have a request to play Children's Parade from the Children's Freedom album.
Oh, Freedom's Children album. Okay, I can. Let me see. Pull that up. Now, you know, it wouldn't work with me playing it by myself. Let's see.
There's a follow-up question in this request as well.
All right, let me this up so I can share my video. All right, here's Children's Parade. stop there. Couldn't be mindful of time. But yeah, that's Children's Parade.
Okay, that was wonderful. Thank you. I just have to note that the request came from our friend Michelle, who actually introduced us to Reginald, for everyone here who doesn't know Michelle. So thank you, Michelle, and thank you for that request.
Thank you, Michelle.
That was wonderful. And Michelle said that it has a feeling of hope, that song, and that we need that for our kids now. So I too feel that way, and thank you. She also had a follow-up question, which was about who designs your CD cover art, and why you selected that particular artist, because they all have sort of a similar hue and tone.
Mm-hmm. So Ricardo designs my albums, and Ricardo is a social justice artist. His artwork specializes with social justice themes, and so because that's kind of like the theme of my albums when I talk about the music and what the music means, uh, we started together uh, for the album. We we were introduced, and then we started working on this concept, and we saw that we had visions when it came to activism, the idea of using art for activism, and then been working together for every album. And what we do is we sit down, or in the case of the pandemic, emails, and we talk about the meaning of the music, and then I send him the samples, and he listens, and we talk. I tell him sometimes I like do a little sketch, like I might, love album. I sent him a little sketch. It didn't look like the product, but it was a sketch of what I envisioned for the album, and then we'll talk, and then he will work his magic, and that'll be the process. That's the process. It's important for me for not only having music with meaning, but also the art. So that my pictures in any of my albums. Sometimes people record, I'd be like, they'll be posing for the album. That's not my vibe. So album, I wanted to also have the artwork that sticks to the message, and then you have the music that gives you the audible example.
That's beautiful. So another question that came in is, do you have any advice for becoming a more open or skillful listener?
Yes. Actively listen, right? And so a lot of times, I remember as a kid before I became a musician, um, we would listen to the beats. Listen to reggae music, like, oh man, I love the beat. We listen to clips of, I love the beat, or I love the groove, right? And we're missing the message of the music. And so actively listening is not just listening to the words and having the words, but actually able to hear all the subtle nuances within the recording. So let's say you listen to a piece of music. One of the things you can do is say, okay, listen to the song in its totality. I like the song. So that might be the first impression. And then you ask yourself, why do I like the song? And so back and listen and focus on maybe the most minute instrument. It might be a triangle. It might be something, not those instruments are not important, but something that's real subtle in the background. And so go back and listen, just focus in on just that instrument. And so go through the whole recording focusing on that instrument. Then come back and focus on another instrument. And you go through that process of really listening to that, and then you could hear how the two instruments interact with each other. So now you have a deeper understanding how those two instruments are interacting. And then come back and focus on the third instrument and go through that process until you cover all the instruments you can hear on the recording, all the voices. And when you finish listening like that, you have a complete understanding of the music. Not only you are be able to understand why you like the music, but you start hearing things that you didn't hear before. And the beautiful thing about music is that every time you listen, you hear something else that you didn't hear before. Like, for example, music is my profession. And I still listen to recordings today where I'm like, wow, I didn't hear that before. Because my ears are growing, my ears are expanding. And so the idea is to actively listen, to see all the ingredients. Sometimes when you have a chef, right? A chef cooks some food and they might say to you, what do you taste? You'd be like, oh, I taste some turkey, or I taste some fish. but what cylinders did I use? And you'd be like, garlic, adobo. They're like, no, I use this and that, and blah blah. And a chef can taste a food, and they can be able to tell you, oh, I can taste this, I taste that, I can taste whatever. And so the same way a chef can taste food, be able to be able to recognize the different seasonings used within that dish. It's the same way when you listen to music. If you listen to it actively, you'll be able to recognize all the ingredients within a composition.
Thank you so much. That both made me hungry for food and hungry for listening to another song, and taking that practice back to just my daily interactions with songs. That was really wonderful. Yeah, and some other folks also thought that that explanation was really beautiful, so thank you. So
You're welcome.
I'm not seeing any more questions coming in, but we still have 5 minutes, so I would welcome or invite anyone to get their last minute questions in. And Reginald, if you have another song you might want to play to close us out, I'm
Okay.
sure we would all love that.
All right. So what would I guess I'll wait to sort of see what folks decide, and we'll move on.
Yeah, I think, whatever, if there's a song that you feel like is really alive for you right now or really encapsulates what we've been talking about today.
Okay. Well, on most recent album, well, the most that I recorded the album recently, he album. There's a song in there that's deals with forgiveness, but I'm not gonna play that song. What I'll do is I'll play a song from the Spiritual Awakening album titled Atonement, right? And sometimes when we're dealing with a healing process, the atonement is part of that process, So I'll play Atonement for you. So hopefully that will suffice. Here's Atonement. mindful of time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I was really into that song. Sorry, I'm a little unfocused, but yes, being mindful of time, that is all the time that we have with you today. Reginald, thank you so much for sharing your stories and your beautiful music with us and making all
Thank you for
these
having me.
important connections. Thank you all for being with us. And just a quick reminder that we did record this webinar and we'll be posting it to our website soon. We'll make sure we also link Reginald's website so you can find his music. So thank you again, Reginald, and thanks for everyone being
Thank
with
you.
us
Thank
today.
you. All right. Have a
Be
good
well.
afternoon.